think that talking about it and getting it out there made it, I mean, it was still scary, but it makes it less scary. You know how you put stuff away and then it all of a sudden grows out to be this, demon that you didn't realize it was going to be.
And you walk through life with it.
And you walk through life. Yeah. And afraid of it.
Sure.
She lives in Omaha. She lives in the house that my dad said that he had skeletons in his closet. Rebuilt the closet, and they had a soundproof room and all that.
Right.
That's all in Omaha.
And she still lives in that house?
She still lives in that house. I don't think she'll ever move out of that house because of what's in the wall. My dad told my sister Kathy the exact same thing before, 2 weeks before he told me. And the thing is that she did the same thing that I did. We closed him down.
Right.
And people say, why did you close him down? Why wouldn't you have let him talk? Well, what you don't understand is that we have this whole past.
Yes.
And nobody wanted to bring it up.
Of course.
And nobody wanted to talk to my dad about it because it would just bring back all kinds of emotions. I used to hate my father. For a long time, I hated my father for everything that happened. And I'd gotten to the point where I had forgiven him. And people ask me, how can you forgive your dad for doing such terrible things? He was my dad. And forgiveness is not necessarily about the person as it is about the individual who's forgiven. And you have to understand that Fremont, we were running from Omaha. I think that things were getting too hot for us in Omaha. And so I think we went to Fremont and we were hiding out, and that's the reason why none of the addresses match up. That's the reason why.
And you feel like you were hiding out because the girl was missing.
Yeah. This is it. That's the house right there. That's the duplex. It didn't look like that before, but that's the duplex that happened.
All right.
This is the house. This is the duplex on this side right here. And he got in this area right down here in the basement is where he got lit on fire.
How long did you live in Fremont?
Probably 4 years.
4 years?
We lived until the guy found us. We killed the guy and moved out right away.
Okay.
Well, I don't know exactly how he died. We lit him on fire. He started screaming. My dad took a shovel and shoved it into the guy's stomach.
Right.
And I was sent up to my bedroom right after that.
Right.
And so I remember spending the entire night huddled up in a corner in my bedroom. Like I was saying this morning, they all look at me and think, you're the 6'3" guy with the big loud voice. How did all this happen to you? Well, I used to be really small and, tiny. I was a kid,
David walked in to our office about 2 years ago. My first impression was a really sweet guy. It was hard to imagine somebody had gone through what he went through. Unbelievable that those things happen right next door to all of us. A lot of people try and say that it's not believable, but there's just too many people telling the same stories.
My name is David Shurter. My conception happened the night that my father and mother got into a fight. They were very physical with each other. My father was a very violent man. My father ended up raping my mother in front of my 3 older siblings, and that was how I was conceived that night. Satanism is a philosophy. Even though there's ritualistic practices, it's more of a perception of looking at life. It's a very narcissistic way. It heralds the serpent as the champion of free choice and of free will. There's Luciferianism, and then there's Satanism. Luciferianism, how I perceive it, is that they believe in the Antichrist. So the people that I was raised with were not only satanic, but they were Luciferian in that they believed the rise of the Antichrist and that they would get riches and glory and eternal life after the fall of heaven. My father was a rich man. His family originally were called the Rothschilds. He was born in Niles, Michigan. Our family owned the town of Cassopolis, Michigan. My mother was adopted. A year before I was born, she got into a serious car accident where she had serious head injury, and she came back completely changed from that. So I only knew my mother with head injury. She was involved in selling us. She was also loving. My mother was, again, a paradox just like my father. She could be very loving and very caring, but she was also one of the worst and most voracious alcoholics I've ever met. She could go from loving you and being very supportive and very caring to calling the police on you and having you thrown out, just depending on how much Gordon's gin she had to drink. But the abuse that my father put her through and all of the stuff that was going through in our family basically ruined her. She went into labor with me on Thanksgiving night, but because the date of my birth was so important, I wasn't born until December 6, 1966 at 6:03 in the morning. The number 666 and the combination of 12s and 6s were symbolic for what was being used in the rituals for Satanism. My father was the one who was really heavily involved with it, and then my stepmother became very heavily involved with it. My mother was more forced into it by my father. You know, she really didn't have any choice. My father beat the crap out of her all the time. When I came forward and write the letter to my dad,
Right.
my brothers and sisters started talking, and they started talking about, well, Dad never beat me with a board. He had a rope that had a knot in it and stuff like that. And we were just all talking, and I was just like, don't you realize we just don't, for us, you know, talking about murdered kids and stuff gets everyone else just like,
Right.
But for us, it was just so commonplace. A lot of the kids that were sacrificed in my honor. A lot of the deaths, the stuff that was going on was held in my honor. It was a mindset that they had, that they programmed me with as a child. A belief system. They just believed that I was to be ordained as the Antichrist. As such, I had responsibilities. I had responsibilities for intelligence. I had responsibilities. A lot of the stuff through MK Ultra was psychic abilities and thinking outside the box. Soldiering. They did a lot of stuff for as far as soldiering, teaching me how to fight. I was being trained to be a sociopath, hurt kids, be a predator, all of that. All of the things that my brother ended up being. They groomed me to be a sociopath and really did their best to try and reinforce that image in my own mind. To be the Antichrist and what I was being trained to do and all of that was to hurt other people. And, you know, if you're not a sociopath, you know, hurting other people isn't that great of a thing. The person that was brought up to be against God never existed, wasn't part of me. I wanted a relationship with God, and I believed for a long time that I was that dark person and did not want to be associated with that. My fight against it was not so much against, my fight was against God for a long time, in that I did not want to be this person. For a long time, I just wanted to go live my life. I just wanted to be like everybody else. I just wanted to be normal. I didn't feel like I could be. I did a lot of, with the shamanic stuff, Native Americans believe that if you're afraid of something, you should embrace it. And I've done a lot of that through my, you know, that's why if you go up to my office, you'll see a lot of Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland stuff. And then it's because I've embraced the stuff that used to frighten me.
What do those represent that you need to embrace them to get over your fear for?
The childhood. It's all of that shit represents my childhood.
Okay.
And the thing about it is that I tell people that there's separate categories. I always remember the satanic stuff, but the MK Ultra stuff, I kind of repressed.
Right.
And I think the reason why I remembered one and not the other is because even though I was involved with the Satanism and with kids and all of that, It wasn't happening specifically to me.
Right.
I wasn't being tortured.
Right.
But when you put the MK Ultra stuff into it, that was very personal to me. And it was being done to me.
Right.
And so I've repressed,
So-
it's not that I'm repressing that, it's not accessible or it's going to come up in false memories or anything like that. A lot of the mind control and the stuff that went happened was symbolic. It happened in children's symbolism because it was kids who were actually being abused.
Okay.
And behavioral responses, mental responses. It was all a form of control. It's meant to keep survivors down.
Okay.
You go see a Pocahontas is a perfect example. If you follow Pocahontas and you watch Pocahontas, she has all kinds of Masonic symbolism and symbols that follow her in the wind. I think the biggest difference between me, I've thought about it a lot, and I never lost my empathy for the victims. The victims of this whole mess were basically objectified and turned into objects, and I've never been able to take a human being and objectify the individual. I never lost the compassion or the interest in humankind. I did not want to be the bad guy. I didn't want to be the one who abused people or used people. I felt that it was better to help people than hurt them. They like you a lot more.
Your father's parents demanded that he move in with what would be your stepmother before he divorced your mother.
No, they demanded that he get married.
Okay.
He moved in and they demanded that he get married to my stepmother and not live with her. He was living with her before the divorce was final between him and my mother. That was at 3.
Do you think that was arranged through?
I don't know how arranged it was. My stepmother was his secretary at his business, and so it was a match made in hell. They're both sociopaths. They both like to hurt kids.
Do you think that your grandparents practiced Satanism?
I can't say. I know that my great uncle Phil did. He was the one who inducted my father and my uncle Jack. I don't think my grandfather Shurter was involved, but my dad and my uncle Jack were definitely involved. It's been generational. My grandmother Shurter certainly benefited from her status, social status, and all of that.
Do you think your father, as a sociopath, maybe used it to justify the things that he was doing? And
My dad used everything to justify everything. My dad there was a joke that my dad said that he was perfect. He could walk on water because he knows where the rocks are. And that was the epitome of my father. He really did think he was perfect. He was very narcissistic. Most people who are sociopaths are very narcissistic, and they don't really think much about anything about themselves, and they don't think about themselves in a critical light. My dad was definitely a sociopath, but more than that, he was narcissistic.
do you believe that the devil lived inside of your father?
I believe something lived inside my father. Whether or not I want to frame it as the devil or Satan or anything like that, I really couldn't say that. Something lived inside my father. Do I believe that the satanic cult revered him? For a long time, I just thought that he was the fall guy. That if it came out, he would get, he would have the fall guy. But there was something that brought my family into the fold. Whether or not it was kids that they were willing to sell, whether or not there was something that lived inside my father and people recognized it. Plus, he was a very good child abductor. He was, vicious, violent, quick, intelligent. I knew it was happening. I knew what was happening as a kid, but I was never involved with it. They would just disappear. I wasn't involved with the actual abductions, but you would have friends. My sister says the same thing. She would have friends and they would just disappear. And we believed that they were involved in the child abduction thing. My dad was using his children as a ploy for a hunting ground. And so I never saw it actually happen. I mean, I was never involved in an actual child abduction, but I was involved in the ritual murders of children. And so I knew that they were being abducted. They had to have found them someplace. People weren't just offering up their kids. Things were starting to become very serious in Omaha, Nebraska. Child abductions were getting known. People were starting to talk. We ran from Omaha to Fremont. Father of a girl that disappeared that was one of my friends showed up at the house in Fremont and found us. The guy came and banged on the door, started asking about his daughter, knew that I was her playmate, and so he found us. My dad brought him into the living room and started talking to him. My stepmother went and made him a glass of lemonade. It was either lemonade or tea, I don't remember exactly what it was, but put drugs in it to where it would knock him out. We drug him down into the basement, and then that night, my family gathered around him, and my father doused him with lighter fluid, or charcoal fluid, or some sort of flammable liquid, and my stepmother lit a match and handed it to me, and I was forced to throw the match on him. He started screaming. My dad had a shovel, and my dad shoved the shovel into his stomach to knock the wind out of him, and I was told to go upstairs to my bedroom. It was weird, being by the house and remembering that night where I huddled in a corner in my room the whole night. Didn't get any sleep. Imagine that, yeah. And then afterwards, we ran from Fremont to Grettinger. We murdered him out of complete fear that we were gonna get found out. I believe that he was buried around Silver Lake, Minnesota, which was where we had a cabin.
Your training and other children that maybe were going through the same thing that you were drugs used?
Oh, drugs were always used. It was always a key component to it. I think that's the reason why lighting that guy on fire who came and found us in Fremont is what destroyed my training, because I wasn't drugged. There was a momentum that they built up in fear, not only in their victims, but the children that they were abusing, the people the kids that they were doing mind control with. It didn't just happen. It wasn't just like, all of a sudden you're standing there and they just kill someone. There was this building up, this crescendo that they had to do. It was a big game. My dad used to wake us up in the middle of the night, beat the crap out of us, and get so excited about beating us up that we'd end up getting raped in the end. And so my sleeping patterns are all of my brother and sister's sleeping patterns are terrible.
When the children are being trained, is there a certain age where things just stop?
Depending on the child, but from what I've seen, no. If they can continue it into adulthood, and I've seen people who have been survivors of this, who have been programmed and been involved unwittingly in the cult, all of their lives, and to break out of it is very difficult. I think if I wouldn't have had my training broken, they anticipated me being involved in the cult forever.
Right. Your dad feared you at a certain point.
I became angry, and I'm 6'3". I have a big booming voice, and my father knew what I was trained for as a kid, and so he used to call me an animal that only went on instinct. He was afraid of me for a while. He told me one time that he got a permit to carry a concealed weapon because of me. And my whole reply to him was, well, Dad, why did you feel the need that you needed to kill me? I'm not that crazy. I mean, I'm not violent. I'm not vicious. I'm not anything like that. What were you doing to me that you were afraid I was going to attack you? But more afraid of what I could say as an adult, now that I've started to talk. There was a lot of pain. There was a lot of degradation. They went out of their way to where you would not want to remember. I wanted to keep everything quiet and keep everything silent.
Right.
And so, especially I think as a guy, there's just this humiliation of being so vulnerable. I never knew who was doing it.
Right.
As a kid, they didn't do introductions. You just had adults that were doing stuff to you.
Okay.
Most of the electric shock that was happened at off at Air Force Base, in the underground bunkers that they've just filled with concrete now.
Right.
But that's where a lot of the MK Ultra, the electric shock, the drugging was both with the MK Ultra off at Air Force Base and at Forest Lawn and Hummel Park during the satanic ritual stuff.
How old were you when this was going on?
Oh man, it was from my conception on, up until the age of 10.
Oh, when everything fell apart.
Right.
So, do you remember how they would get you to the base?
Our parents took us there. You would get drugged.
Uh-huh.
They'd give you a glass of Kool-Aid or something like that, and by the time you got to the base, you were
So
whacked out.
You don't really remember getting to the base, or?
But it happened so much. I remember going on to the base, I remember driving around, but a lot of times when it comes down to it, when you were in the car and you were driving with them, you never knew what kind of terrible thing you were going to. They would be the ones who would usually drug us or start off with the drugs. You would get there and more drugs would be applied. But my father and...
Would he drive right onto the base?
Yeah.
And hand you
Yeah.
around? Was Kino ever at any of the rituals?
All the time. He was involved a lot in the MK Ultra stuff on base. He was also heavily involved with the stuff that was going on at Hummel Park.
Okay.
I believe that my family was involved heavily with the Finders. The Finders are nothing more than a collection of child abductors. Now, I would show you my brother's apartment, but I don't remember. I remember being there once, but I got in trouble for walking into his bathroom to go to the bathroom and finding he had a dark room in his bathroom full of child porn, hanging up, all kinds of pictures. I wasn't supposed to go into the bathroom. I didn't realize that. My brother and my father were outside talking, and I didn't think anything about it. I had to use the bathroom, so walked in, and...
I mean, how much do you think your dad had to do with it?
He had everything to do with it. My family and my brother actually lived in Tallahassee in the time where the Finders came out in Florida. Someone's taking our kids off the streets. And so I do believe that my family was definitely involved with the Finders. Well, a lot of kids were used for sex.
Yeah, sure.
And so my friend Keely, who went through MK Ultra and the satanic stuff, she was used for sex when she was in her teenage years. Money. Abducting a child and selling them into child trafficking is an untold amount of money. It was a question on your reality constantly. Narcissists can rewrite reality to where my dad could beat the crap out of you, and then right after getting beat the crap out of you, either blame you for having the crap beat out of you, or tell you that I didn't hit you, I didn't do anything to you. Because even though the satanic abuse stopped when I was 10, the physical abuse only got worse. The physical, emotional abuse only got worse. And so I hid a butcher knife in my bedroom, hoping that my brother would find it. It took 3 days for him to find it, but it made my stepmother hysterical, who was afraid I was going to slice them up in their sleep. And what gave me the idea is that I was reading a book by Stephen King, and my dad walked in and realized that I was reading Stephen King and ripped the book up. And that was when I started to realize, you guys are afraid of me, and you're afraid of what I'm reading. Their fears about me were unfounded, but you have to understand that they were so narcissistic and so selfish amongst themselves that they would put what they would do on other people and project on what they would do onto other people. My mother said it so well. My father lied so well that he convinced himself. And that was what a lot of them were doing, was lying and convincing themselves.
Okay, how old were you when your mother left?
3.
3?
Yeah.
How much of a struggle for you has it been
It was a huge struggle. 13 years of therapy, I've gotten better at it. But I think that as survivors, first you have the fear of retaliation, then you have the fear of discovery, then you have the fear of vulnerability. And so for most survivors, it's damn near impossible to ask for help because you're afraid that people are going to look at you and say, oh, you're crazy, which has happened. You know, not so much to me, it happened to my sister big time. And as a child, it's virtually impossible because they tell you everybody is involved in the cult. So you have no idea who to trust. They make it so you can't trust your teachers, you can't trust the police, you can't trust anybody. And so therefore, it's very difficult to reach out. Well, and as guys, you know, a lot of the training, people assume they were women, but a lot of them were men. And men don't want to accept their vulnerability. You know, we've been told, you know, men don't cry, all of that stuff. And so it's very difficult as a man to reach out and claim that this happened. My sister was the black sheep. She was treated as the black sheep. And so she didn't have the same allegiance to my father and to the situation that my older siblings did. The same thing holds true for me. I was the black sheep. The thing about it is that when you get confronted with darkness, there are people who just ultimately go towards the light. You get sick of being in the dark and you want the light.
Do you think that your father was ritually abused?
Oh yeah, I'm positive. My great uncle Phil inducted my father and my father's brother into the cult. You know, it's people who control and manipulate and abuse children.
And they're actually using their religion
To justify and make it keep it in secret.
You are diagnosed with PTSD, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you're on disability for PTSD, correct?
Right.
And the PTSD is a direct result of your ritual abuse.
Right.
But they will not say that you're ritually...
No, they won't. Either with me or my sister. My sister got dissociative identity disorder, which is DID, which used to be called multiple personality disorder. And they'll recognize that the abuse is there, they'll recognize the effects are there, they'll even pay for medication and for therapy because of the results are there, but they won't come through and say, this person was ritually abused, this person, you know. My shamanic work has been very key and instrumental in my healing process. It's allowed me to go back and access the things that I need to access. The very first shamanic work that I'd ever done, I had a vision of meeting my great-grandmother Shurter. She was so proud of me. My father was a pilot. I had completely spaced that aspect off until he died, and my stepmother dancing on his grave like Rumpelstiltskin reminded me of the airplanes. And what would end up happening is that there were small airplanes, and they would get me and a few other kids in there, and those kids didn't come back because they were thrown out of the plane. At the time, you never knew exactly who was going to be thrown out of the plane. You never knew if it was going to be you, but they were meant to be scare tactics. Absolutely terrified. And to the point where I, for a long time, couldn't fly. It triggers me so bad to be in an airplane that it takes me a day after flying to get back to normal. It's the same aspect of getting in a car and going to sleep in a car. You know, you got to the point where whenever you were in a car, you'd go to sleep because you never knew what you were going to go face next.
When your father passed away, was that a weight off your shoulders?
It was a weight. But I loved my father, and so it was... My father was a paradox to me. You know, he was one of the most violent, crazy men I've ever met, and yet he was my father, and I still loved him as my dad. My stepmother, for all intents and purposes, was my mother. I went to go live with her and my father when I was 3, and they kept me away from my biological mother until I was 18.
And why do you think that they did that?
Because they were afraid that my mother was going to talk, and then I would talk. My father one time told me, it was one of the best times I've ever remembered with my father, but he told me that we were talking about my sister Cindy, and I told him that I didn't play the games my sister Cindy played. And he told me, that's one thing I've always appreciated about you, David. And of course with them, you can always have backhanded compliments. But he told me that he always knew where he stood with me. Good or bad, you always know where you stand.
Was your
handler.
Your handler.
Right.
I don't know, do you have any respect for him?
Humanitarian level, I have to say that I have no respect for him. Going through his beliefs and watching his beliefs and all of that, I wouldn't call it respect, I would call it fear. A lot of people are very afraid of Colonel. What they wanted to do was get the brain to think in different ways. The part of our brain that we don't use, they wanted us to process with that. And so is trauma and all of that a necessary part of it? I can't say that you can do it the other way because I don't know. I would love to have a conversation on tape with him, but do I used to want to do terrible things to him physically and want to hurt him and all of that. Is that the case anymore? No. I would still hold him accountable for what he's done.
Sure.
But will I ever get the vindication that I'm looking for? Never. Because the vindication that I would be looking for is if I could go back in time and stop the stuff that happened when it was happening. It's a little bit too late now. How can you reverse time? Regardless. It's happened. I also look at my parents. I was so angry with my parents and wanting vindication for so long that when I finally got it, it wasn't what I wanted. It would be great if I could just let all the pain go, but what you end up doing is having to compartmentalize the pain just to allow yourself to survive and succeed. And a lot of times you just have to let the things be the way they are. And the only thing you can really control is yourself. And that's what I've learned in therapy. The only thing I control is myself. And if I'm a good person, that's okay for me. Born in Omaha, Nebraska, December 6, 1966, into a family of Satanists and child abductors. Then we ran to Grettinger, where I lived until I was 18. Then I came down to live with my mom. The people who were involved with the cult and a lot of the stuff with the failed savings and loan Franklin Credit Union ingratiated themselves into my life.
So walk us through a day at Hummel Park. How would it start?
Start off as a picnic. It'd be pretty fun. You'd go play. It'd get dark. As it got darker, the adults would get more drugged out and with more alcohol, and you would have the satanic stuff would start happening later at night. You would start to get, kids could get raped, they could get abused. In the pavilion at Hummel Park, kids would get tortured. Hot pokers, knives, cuts, slices, just anything they could to actually hurt the person. Twin fires of hell. And each one of them were lit to symbolize the fires of hell on both sides. The twin fires were used as pokers. The thing about it is that they would use hot pokers and they'd just torture kids. And so that was a lot of what it was. In the middle, as you saw, was the pentagram. A lot of times there was a stone altar, but the stone altar wasn't built in. Obviously, it was brought in, so it was portable. We not only use that stone altar at Hummel Park, we use it in Forest Lawn as well. Forest Lawn Cemetery was the disposal system that they had where they would cremate the kids that were abused or that were tortured and murdered.
The for the rituals at Hummel Park.
Right.
And they would be taken to Forest Lawn.
Right.
And disposed of.
Right. There was satanic stuff that happened at Forest Lawn as well, and the chapel that was built by the Freemasons, both in the chapel and outside of the chapel. Crematorium underneath the chapel was used as sometimes with hide and seek. Now people will say, oh, that's small, but you have to understand we were kids. And so as kids, the world looks a lot bigger.
What were some of the things they would do with the kids at Forest Lawn?
Same thing they would do at Hummel Park. Torture them, murder them, play hide and seek, where if you got found, you were murdered.
And there's incidents with your siblings there, correct?
Oh, my sister and brother were buried up to their necks one time and left for dead, and left there for enough time to where they were afraid they were going to suffocate.
Who did that to them?
My dad, my dad's friends, the people who were involved with the abuse.
Were you sexually abused by your father?
Oh yeah, constantly.
So your stepmother was a part of the abuse as well?
Heavy part of the abuse. My parents were kind of like that, is that they could sell us to whoever they wanted. They could do whatever they wanted, all this horrible shit. And yet there was another side of them that was completely protective over us, that they wouldn't let. If a stranger came in and wanted to fuck with us, that was totally out of the question. But if they could set it up where they could control it, then it was okay.
Do you think that through the sexual abuse, selling the children, that child pornography was involved?
Oh yeah, it was definitely involved. My brother lived in Fremont at the time, and so I walked into his bathroom to go use his bathroom one time, my brother at his apartment, and there was just child pornography everywhere. You know, the bathroom was his dark room, so.
And who was in the house at the time?
My dad and my brother were there, but they were out smoking cigarettes outside. That's how I got into the bathroom, because I would never have been allowed into the bathroom. It's just I was a kid, had to use the bathroom, you know, didn't think anything of it.
All right, so in the end, I know, how was your relationship with your mom? That's really important to me. I think it's important to you. I think it's going to be important.
Well, it was tumultuous. I loved my mother.
Right.
I ended up taking care of her for the last 5.5 years of her life. She died in our home. I was very close to my mother. I hated her for a long time because I felt she abandoned me. And then my mother and I ended up becoming friends instead of the usual son-mother relationship. And so I think that's, you know, pretty much, I loved my mom in the end. You know, I adored her. She made me mad. She was one of the most selfish people I've ever met, but she was my mom, you know.
And you took care of her.
And I took care of her. And I always, for anybody who's out there who, you know, has a family member or someone to take care of, it's the best thing you can do for yourself. You know, it really is. And so I just really, you know, I appreciated the relationship I had with my mother in the end. My father told me my Aunt Sandy and my grandmother Shurter were colonial dames. Colonial dames are an elite group of a bigger group called Daughters of the American Revolution. And what separates Daughters from American Revolution and colonial dames is that you can be a colonial dame if your family was involved in the power structure during the 13 colonies, which my family was.
The Daughters of the American Revolution were involved in Hummel Park.
That does not surprise me.
There's a plaque there.
Oh, is there?
Yeah.
Oh.
That says exactly that they were instrumental in putting together Hummel Park.
Colonial dames being involved with Hummel Park, I'm not surprised. I always tell people I was born bright but not pretty. Knows that this is hard. I didn't realize how hard it would be to go down memory lane like this.
Nice guy.
Yeah.